We're live.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Town of Suez Committee of the Whole meeting, June the 27th, 2023 at 9 a.m. in council chambers. The first off, we need the approval of the agenda. And are there any late items?
No,
Thank you. We have a motion, please. Councillor Bennett, Councillor Chong, all in favor. Thank you. And the committee of the whole minutes were on June the 13th. We need a motion to adopt those. Councillor King, Councillor Puerto Rico, all in favor. Thank you. So today we are welcoming a petition, a delegation from Sharon Jesse. And Sharon is a longtime resident of the city, and she would like to talk to us. So Mrs. Jesse, would you come up to the microphone, please? Is it on? Is
Yes.
there? Oh, there it is. Go ahead, Mrs. Jesse. Thank you.
Good morning, Mayor McCordock and councillors. My name is Sharon Jesse. I'm a resident of Osluis for all but 7 years of my life. A taxpayer for 50 years. My children born and raised here. I'm a volunteer of a multitude of hours of the community service over the years. A school board trustee for 4 years in the 80s and co-owner of Joe's Plumbing and Heating Limited for 32 years. Thank you for the opportunity and the time to speak with you this morning. I wish to address a letter I wrote to the mayor and councillors on March the 21st, 2023, which I personally delivered to the town office, asking that it be copied to the mayor and all councillors, and that it be brought up and discussed at a council meeting. Firstly, I will speak to my letter, then I'll give you an update on the matter, and then follow up on my letter. My letter to council was prompted by a letter written by the late Virginia Cook's daughters to the school board District 53, requesting the board name the Osluis Community Mini Theater in Virginia's memory. I will not read my letter and the letter of the Cook family, as I was told that you all have copies of both. I trust they will be included in the minutes of this meeting. I would like to expound on my letter, which was a request for the town of Osluis to support the request the Cook family sent to the school board. I was a close friend of Virginia's for 50 years and was a confidant and support during the process of getting the construction of our secondary school approved. The government funding provided for the construction did not include the building of a theater or an auditorium. Virginia, a member of the school board at that time, was adamant our secondary school must have a theater for the community and the students. She pressed for the school district to fund it, but upon denial, she turned to the town of Osluis and requested they hold a referendum to fund the construction. The town council agreed, and in September 1977, a 20-year referendum of $150,000 was approved overwhelmingly by Osluis taxpayers. The school board consented to Virginia's going to Kelowna to view a couple theaters and come back with a design recommendation, and I went with her that day. The board concurred with her recommendation and proceeded to contact the architect, and thus our community theater is modeled after one in Kelowna. She was a warrior for her cause and the founder of our community theater. A past chairman of the board who served many years with Virginia on the board said in our conversation of a couple months ago, if it had not been for Virginia, there would be no mini theater. That is so profound and so very true. I asked the town council to support the Cook's family request because I believe that elected officials are the stewards over their jurisdiction. You are the stewards of the town of Osluis, which not only means to oversee, manage, and plan for infrastructure, water, sewer, lake quality, green space, fire and rescue, policing, maintaining town buildings, etc., but also to preserve the history of our town of Osluis. Naming our community theater after the founder would be preserving history of Osluis. Please give that idea some thought for the future. I wish my letter would have been addressed by council back in March or early April, but I was given the opportunity to speak and was given the opportunity to speak at that time. Next, I'll update you on the matter. The Cook family request to the school board was denied, based on the board's practice of not naming any building in the district after a person. In spite of the family being put on the agenda to speak to their request at the April 23rd open board meeting, the board made their decision at a closed board meeting in March. The two daughters did attend April 23rd meeting, asking the board to reconsider, and gave each gave a presentation citing their reasons. So at the moment, it's a moot now. Now, going forward, I wrote a letter to the mayor and town council on March 21st, 2023. And delivered it in person to the town office, requesting it be discussed at council and hope for a positive response. My letter has never been listed in correspondence received by the town, did not go to a council meeting, and to date, I have not received a written reply to my letter. I spoke on the phone to Mayor McCordup a couple times prior to writing my letter, and she did some research on the history of the referendum, ownership of the mini theater, etc., and got back to me with this information. A couple of weeks later, when I knew there had been a council meeting, I phoned Mayor McCordup to see what the discussion was and the outcome. She advised that it had not gone to a council meeting, and that Mr. Risling had suggested council not get involved. I would like to know what is the town's procedure when a resident taxpayer writes a formal letter to the mayor and councillors and asks that its topic be discussed by council. What I do know for a fact is my letter was never officially acknowledged as being received in correspondence received, never discussed by elected officials, the stewards of our history of Osoyoos, and to this day, I have not received a written reply to my letter from the town of Osoyoos. Even at this late date, and the request is a moot topic at this time, I deserve a written reply to my letter, which I believe would be common business procedure. This concludes my address, Mayor McCordup.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Jeffy. I want you to know that we do have copies of your letters, both the February one and the March one. And I have certainly gone through all of the archives along with Ms. Oshasky, and we have looked up all of the pertinent information concerning, which I believe I told you on the phone. And the fact that there was a referendum, that was a 20-year referendum, and as of 1977, the theater does belong to the school district. So we are not able to get involved in school district business. That's a separate part of government. We certainly have looked at it. We spent a lot of time, and I've spoken to you several times on this. But because it no longer is owned by the town, the mini theater, and it's called the Osoyoos Secondary Theater, is what somebody told me. That's why we could not get involved any further. I certainly know that we've missed a couple of opportunities to have you speak at council, and that has been cleared up. And I thank you very much for coming today and giving us this letter. And Mrs. Jessie has copies for everybody if anybody wants them. Is there anybody that would like to comment? No?
Yeah, hold on.
Yes, go ahead.
Councilman. This suffice this conversation, or would you like something in writing replying to your letter?
Like I said, at the end, I think common business procedure is when a business, which that's what the town is, receives a formal letter. I think that it should be discussed. It should be listed as correspondence in your minutes. It should be discussed, and I should get a written reply. So I think that's common business procedure. As far as I know, I've run a business for 32 years, so I think, so I would like a reply to my letter, even at this late date, with maybe the council's idea. And this is my address to council this morning if the councilors want it.
Thank you. Are you?
I'm suggesting reply to the letter. We do have it on our computer.
Yeah.
We've all read it, I'm sure, the two letters.
But there's
But
a new
you
one.
need
This is
to-
the address of my address this morning, if you want that. That's
Okay, that's, thank you.
Thank you. Could we address a letter to Mrs. Jessie, please, concerning these letters that she sent?
Yes, you can.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mrs. Jessie. Okay, the next thing on our agenda this morning is water system master plan update, and we welcome Steve Underwood from True Consulting. Thank you, please.
Everyone. Which if I point to the screen, which one's the?
I think
Whichever way works better.
Yeah, they-
pointing at ours.
try to limit the points, or maybe we'll go to both. Yeah, so I'm here to give you an update today on the water system master plan project we've been working on for the better part of a year. The master plan includes an asset management plan. So it's a water master plan with capital and asset management. So it's a unique document. You haven't seen one like that, or the town hasn't ever developed one like that before. And so this one is new. The sections kind of bounce around a little bit, where it starts on kind of overview of the system, then moves into asset management, then capital, then it tries to bring them all together at the end as a combined capital and asset management plan. So I'll take you through this outline, and then we'll talk implementation at the end, which is the most challenging section, and the section that probably needs the most work at this time. This is just a listing of all the current assets in the water distribution system. You can see it's 77 kilometers of water main, valves, hydrants, etc. This is a map of the. Yeah. Right.
Back up. I'm not an engineer. I know AC is asbestos, concrete and PVC. I know that. What's HDPE and EI?
Okay, yeah, PVC is polyvinyl chloride, so AC is asbestos cement.
Nope.
HDPE is high density polyethylene. That would be a black type of pipe that you might see that gets fused together. DI is ductile iron, which would be a metal pipe with a cement mortar lining. The majority of your pipe is PVC now. And the focus of today's conversation is going to be the 23 kilometers of AC. And we're talking asset management.
You mean the DI is good?
The DI is newer, and we'll get to that. But yeah, the DI has a similar life to AC, but it was installed at a newer date. All the AC was installed in one time period. And it had a 50-year life, which was more than 50 years ago.
Thank you.
This is just a schematic of the distribution system. Well, the laser doesn't really point to the screen anyway. There's 3 reservoirs, or 3 reservoir locations, 4 reservoirs. 2 of them are located at the 340. That's why it's the 340 reservoirs, plural. Those 340 reservoirs provide water to the majority of the town. So all the blue pipes in the town kind of bottom. The red pipes are serviced by a pressure reducing station that actually takes water from the industrial park reservoir. The industrial park serviced from the industrial park reservoir, and Dividend Ridge is from the Dividend Ridge reservoir. So that shows the general layout of how everything works. All the reservoirs are on the west side, so all our storage is in one side of town. And we have no storage on the east side. This shows, and this is probably the most important slide that we're going to look at. This shows all your pipes and when they were built and what material they are. And what I want you to focus on is all the red pipes on the left hand side. Those are all AC pipes. They have a published design life of 50 years, and they were all built basically more than 50 years ago. Some of them 60, some of them 70 years ago. Or mainly 60 years ago, but they're all past their design life or approaching the end of their life. The rest of your pipes, you can see there's a bulk at the far right hand side that are all new PVC pipes. Those pipes have a much longer design life, and therefore don't affect asset management as much at this time. And then all the pipes in the middle are generally PVC as well if they're blue. The other colors that are hard to spot on this figure are some of the ductile and HDPE pipes. They represent a very small percentage of your overall pipes. But really, when you look at the red ones, those are the ones that are going to be causing us a challenge in the next, time period, 10 to 20 years. If we're lucky. These are locations of your water sources. So we have 6 wells, 3 on the east side, 3 on the west side. Well 6 is located up in the Lacey Point area. It's kind of the further, the most separated from the rest.
Steve, can I ask what happened to 2 and 7? Were there ever? wells 2 and 7?
Yeah, well two was abandoned. It used to be located near well one, in the solid days. Well seven's drilled, it's located beside well 6. And we've made 2 applications in the last 3 years to bring it online, and all have been denied. We're basically abandoning the idea of well 7. It's kind of almost disappointing that we numbered them because it's, because, yeah, there's no 2 and 7. And what we're really talking about now is building 9, 10, 11, 12. And we're continuing with the numbering thing. This slide shows what your well capacities should be and what they are. And this is an interesting slide to show what's happened is, and if you look at well 6 across the line from well 6, it says 2022 actual supply 1.1. That's how much water well 6 supplied last year in a day. It could supply 3.1. So some of these reports we've been giving to you said, oh, your well capacity is this. You know, we draw a line on the map. But your actual capacity, what we're actually getting out of the wells, is lower. And that's the key piece of information that we didn't really realize till we got into this capital plan and analyzed your flow data, that some of these wells have degraded and we haven't rehabilitated them, and so therefore they're putting out water at a lower rate than they could be. Or the pump within them is just undersized and could be improved. That's the case for wells 4 and 5. You can see they're slightly under what they could do. We could install larger pumps, but those pumps are actually, you know, what they were designed to do, so it's not like they degraded at this time. Back to the reservoirs, this shows the total storage of our reservoirs is 6,000. But note the 340 reservoir at the very top was built in 1965. It has reached the end of its life as well when you talk asset management. That's highlighted by the fact that we've been working on a plan to try and rehabilitate the valving within it. And the cost of that rehabilitation project has been staggering to, you know, the United States $10 million. And it shows you we're working on an asset that's actually at the end of its life. And so that 1,350 cubic meters of storage that are sitting in that reservoir may need to be replaced either at this location or a different location. But this asset is coming to the end of its life, and spending large amount of money is on its valve, and it's something to seriously consider not doing if we're going to end up replacing the asset in a, you know, supposed window, say a 20-year window. Finally, in the existing system, we have manganese. Of all of our 6 wells, 2 of them have low elevations of manganese, as well 1 and well 3. All the rest of the pipes or well sources have manganese that are above the maximum allowable concentration for the Canadian Drinking Water Guidelines. And this is causing constant problems operationally. In the last 5 years, more chlorine is being added to the system at IHA's request. We're chlorinating more, which makes more manganese precipitate out, which causes more cloudy water, more buildup in our reservoirs and our pipes. It's becoming well, almost a nightmare, and that it just keeps accumulating within the system. And then every time we do work within the system, we stir it up, and it takes a long time to try and flush it or calm it back down. And also it allows bacteria to grow within this, you know, buildup of manganese deposits within the walls of the pipes or the floors of the reservoirs, and it creates more challenges for the operators to try and keep the system working or in a healthy condition. That's the system. So then we try and skip to asset management, and that's maybe new to council. Like, we don't really have a current asset management plan that I'm aware of for any of our assets where we're fully funding for their replacement or planning for their replacement. The idea here is that we need to deal with the 22 kilometers of AC water mains and not leave ourselves in a position where when the PVC water mains come to the end of their life, that we haven't planned for that as well. So the idea here is to look at all your assets, figure out what you need to invest annually to make sure that you're making it one kind of common investment. There's several ways to do it, and we tried to go through all of them. The first, approach we took is we just assigned the, expected life for all your assets from the BC guide to tangible capital assets, gives a life expectancy for all your pipes and your pumps and your reservoirs, and then you simply take the total value of what they are and you divide it by those lives. That tells you right off the bat what you should be investing annually for the current assets. Our problem was when trying to write you a recommendation on how to implement that was that all your AC pipes just already need replacing. So how do I tell you which one to replace first? And this comes back to Jared and I having a discussion when the debt was repaid. Jared wanted to replace the water main, and I wasn't 100% sure that was the right thing to do because it's a smaller, the old AC water main. And yes, it's at the end of its life, but how do we pick that one for our capital money as opposed to one in a different location? So we did a risk-based analysis for all of your AC water mains to try and decide what order would I tell you that they should be replaced in. So the risk-based analysis takes a light, and what we had to do was assign a longer life to these lights. So right now, the BC government says the pipe should last 50 years. Well, 50 years is up and they're still on the ground. So we had to say 65 years. They're going to make it 65 most likely. And then apply a factor to that 65-year life based on the risk and the criticality of the pipe. So if the pipe broke and lots of people were going to get water, that had a higher criticality, whereas if the pipe broke and only 20 people were out of water, that had a lower criticality. So we tried to rate all your pipes based on risk, meaning their age and criticality, to come up with a different life and then a different order for recommending their replacement. That allows you to spread the replacement out over, frankly, the capital plan and a little bit beyond. This capital plan is a 20-year capital plan. And so what it ends up deferring is some of the smaller diameter local residential pipes. But that still means when I say risk-based, you're taking risk by even accepting like this isn't like the published guide should say replace these, but what we are doing is running them longer, knowing that some of them will break and we will have to go replace them. So that's the risk we're taking. The plan is to start replacing the critical ones first. So that's what this plan has done, is trying to just, instead of just saying go and replace them all, it's replace them in this order, and that's how to spend your money the wisest. So then we look at asset management as well, is we call it a reserve balance model. That's separate from just dividing it and randomly just saving this amount of money. What we're saying is all these projects, when we do schedule them out over this time period, which is actually 100 years or more, because that's the life of some of these pipes that we're talking about, PVC pipes, is if we replace them as they come due per the schedule that we develop, what does your reserve balance look like if we're how much we have to contribute a year to keep that reserve balance healthy for the future replacement of all the PVCs? And we did look at some other models, and we'll get into that later, but we also wanted to see like what if we reduce that contribution reserve slightly, when does the reserve go below zero, or when can we make some judgment calls about not just following the previous calculation and saving all the money, like what's the sensitivity of it? And so that's kind of the reserve balance model. One of the best outcomes of this assignment was, and it was this map. This is every asset that's in the water system in a GIS format that shows its location. Inside it has its age, its material, its replacement costs. It's all built into one computer model. And we're now using it to produce new composite maps for the town, and it's all up to date. It was amazing that, you know, how different sort of sources of information have different data, and we had to try and splice it all together, but we now have one place where it's all housed and it's all up to date. So in the asset management plan or the asset inventory. This is a listing of all of the assets. And the replacement value and their expected lives. You can see the AC pipe and all the pipes have a range of years for their life expectancy. So AC is now 65 to 72 years, even though the published recommended thing is 50. But telling you we're already stretching this. The reason we're doing that is a risk-based analysis to try and spread this out. But this shows you that your total replacement cost of all of your assets in the water utility will be $100 million. And the average annual investment to make that happen would be 1.457 million. Back to that risk-based calculation, this is the slide that shows where we did that calculation, how we did it, where we used a 0.8 factor for the high risk stuff, which lowered their life to 65 years, and then the 1.2, which brought that life up to 72. The asset management plan, after we did that for the pipe section, the risk-based analysis shows that 4.1 kilometers of pipe is where we really want you to target your money first. This AC pipe that we're determining to be high risk. And then we follow that in the asset management plan with medium risk. We don't actually even get to the lower risk stuff in this current plan. But some of it will come up, like some of those pipes will start breaking to the point where replacement is better than fixing them continually. This is a map that was produced to show where these pipes are, and this is partly to help public works in planning and capital projects. See, all the red pipes on this map are the high risk ones, the ones we want to target first for water main replacement. If we can put common works together where we can maybe share the payment repair costs or something, we can try and soften the blow in this, but it's a good graphical representation of where the next projects are. And you can see there's a red pipe down 89th Street. Previously, we had a presentation about a road design on 89th Street. So there is some synergies, and we can start aligning our capital plans together to try and make this better. But this is where these projects are, and they're going to be a lot in the downtown core because that's where the 1960s pipes are currently sitting, and some of the larger ones are sitting. It's the breakdown of the 100 million, or I'm sorry, of the annual investment, sort of by percentage, or basically the 100 million as well. But it shows you where all the water go, or all the money will go from this investment. A key point here is 20% is road restoration. So one way to try and make this better is to try and find these projects to the line. We won't be able to do it perfectly, but we'll make it a slight improvement by having projects that do align, because we can save 20% of the cost if that road is already being repaid. His graphical representation of how that average annual investment works, and you can see all the blue lines are actual projects. And then the red line is if you spread it out over the entire life, and that's how much you have to invest every year to pay for the blue blips when the blue blips come. And you can see at the very beginning, there's a $10 million one that kind of represents the fact that these are pipes that are already at the end of their life. Like we can't show them further out because they're past. So there's already $10 million worth of pipes that should have been done in previous years, they're not done. But as we move forward, we get to the far end in year 21-13, there's another $8 million. Those are the ones that are farther out that we might want to try and do some sensitivities to not worry about getting perfectly right now, because we don't know everything about what's going to happen in 21-30. But we do know what's happening right now, so it doesn't change. What's in front of us in the next 20 years, it might change what happens, from 20 years from now on. That judgment might be applicable, but we already have 10 million that we're behind, and there's more real close to us. When we did the reserve balance analysis to try and again see how much we can take that 1.4 million and play with lowering it, we got to use the fact that we have 3.033 in reserves that are unallocated. There's more in reserves right now, but some are allocated to the metering program. This is what's left after the metering program allocation, and this does soften it slightly because the AAI calculation assumes you don't have anything saved, so it says you need 1.4 million every year. Whereas this, we get to apply kind of our reserve balance and spend it to take the peak off of that 10 million at the beginning.
Give me AAI again, please. AAI is what?
Average annual investment. And the reserve balance model is run for basically 100 years, and the reason is we try and get the first replacement of the PVC pipe, so that we're looking at where that next big drop off or the big spend is going to be, but it's at the far end of this analysis. So this would be the simplified version of the reserve balance model. It basically takes the spend for all the projects. You can see 10 million comes out in the first year, but you had 3 million in reserve, so it only shows up as a negative 7 million. And then if we spend 1.4, what does our reserve balance look like? And you can see in the year 2100, our reserve balance is at 31 million. So like it's and I don't want to spend time on these 100-year graphs. And what you'll see is in the report, yes, we show a 100-year graph, but then we zoom back into a 20-year because we can't make 100-year decisions. We need to focus back on 20-year decisions. Capital plan. So this is how it gets a bit choppy. I talk distribution system, I talk asset management. Now I have to talk capital, and then I have to at the end try and bring both back together. Normally in my career, this is what we focused on, is capital plans. It was how much are we going to grow, which pipes become deficient, or which aspects of the system become deficient, how much do we expend to keep them up to date. That's kind of what capital plans always were. And so we do still have to go through that exercise. We have a new OCP. So we have expected growth in the town. We look at all of our water system, whether it's storage, source, and see where we're non-compliant, compliant, and then come up with projects to make sure that the expected growth doesn't cause our system to be non-compliant with our standards. So we start with how much water do we have? So this is where I pointed out, and the pointer doesn't. When you see the top blue line, that's how much the horizontal blue line. That's how much water we should be able to produce if all our wells are on. Below it is a solid red line. That's actually how much we were able to produce in 2022 with all our pumps on. So that kind of shows you our maximum capacity, and then the lighter blue horizontal line below that shows you the available flow if one of our wells breaks down, our largest well breaks down, and then the red line below that is our actual 2022 if our largest well broke down. We usually try and meet maximum day demand, which is the dotted line that goes up and touches the top red line. That's our maximum day demand. We try and meet that with one of our wells offline in case there was an mechanical failure with that. That basically tells us that we have the appropriate amount of source with one in our pocket. You can see in 2020, 2021, 2022, our maximum day demand was higher than previous years, and I can assure you 2023 sounds like it's more of the same. We're now in this demand where we're in the 19 to 20s in megaliters per day. Whereas 5 years ago, we were in the 15s, 16s. This is the shift and this is what we have to deal with, and we do not have source water tonight. You can see in 2021, the line basically stops because pumps just run all day and that's all the water we can produce. We can't produce more, so people can't take more. The key part on this is now deciding how much do we allocate or how much do we say we're gonna need to provide. So we look at how much you're using, and the line to look at is MDD liters per capita per day. That's the key line. You can see that at the bottom, the 5-year average is 2,700 liters per person per day in the town of Vesuvius. That's what we're based the start of this capital plan on, is how much water everyone uses. And then below that, you can see we projected population to the year 2043 to see what's our population going to be, and that's a 2% growth rate. And it's interesting that compound interest, how 2% increasing for 20 years is actually a 50% increase in population. But we're looking at a population in 2043 of 9,800. And then right now they're using 27 liters per capita per day. We need to assume water conservation is going to work. So we took the 27 liters per capita per day and we reduced it by approximately 20% by 2043 for liters per capita a day. So we brought that down to 2,200. If we can get better conservation, we can do better.
Good question. Is this total service population, does that include the fluctuation in the summer?
That's one of your challenges. Yes, it does read an actual data, and your maximum day includes the fluctuation, but we're using census populations. But yeah, so that's a hard one.
I guess when you look at census population, we're only about 5,600. 2023. You guys down at 6,300 2 years ago.
Okay, the 6,300, it does also include the rural area that's connected to the domestic system, so that takes it up. So no, we're using census data
Okay.
plus an allocation for the rural system that is connected to the domestic system, because this presentation is about domestic system.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, good question. Then we overlaid the two, and you've seen these graphs before. I've brought some of this stuff before, but we're trying to determine how many sources or what sources we need to meet this demand. You see the middle of those demand curves going up is the 2% growth. The bottom one is 1, and then there's a 3% growth. There will be growth. What it is yet to be seen. We definitely need one more well 9. You see when we get to capital plan why I'm well 9 and 10 on here, but you also in about 2030 well 10 would be required regardless, but right now that is a relatively large jump with 2 wells coming online. This would be if we don't allow for that 20% reduction from water conservation in the same area. We need to get to well 12 by the end of the study period. So we need, instead of bringing on 2 wells, we would be bringing on 4. We didn't really dwell on anything non-conservation. We assumed conservation was a foregone conclusion for the remainder. We didn't really. There's no more slides where we go back and say this is what it means. When we model to see if the system is working, we had to apply different criteria to say what's acceptable. So this is the design criteria we used. Fire flow, we used 60 liters per second for all the residential areas. We got the 225 for industrial, not from your bylaw, but from the National Municipal Construction document. That is showing a more conservative, or what the fire flows have been increasing in the last 20 years, and in your subdivision bylaw it hasn't been necessarily updated. But so we tried to use some higher criteria, knowing that when we do an update, likely this criteria would be applied, so we're trying to make sure that we're meeting a future criteria. If possible, when we're doing our planning projects. The minimum pressure of 40 PSI is kind of a minimum surface pressure that would happen during peak hour demand. And or 20 PSI has to stay in the system whenever one of these above fire flows are occurring. When we look at your reservoir, remember earlier you have 6,000 cubic meters of reservoir storage, but you have 1,300 cubic meters that may be being retired if we don't rehabilitate or renew that source. But and in 2043, it's looking like we need 8,200 cubic meters of storage. So if we were to keep going with current status, we would be adding reservoir capacity. The capital plan though recommends something that the town's already doing, and they're bringing in standby power to the wells to offset some of the need for some of this emergency imbalance in storage. So instead of building more reservoirs, the capital plan actually supports continuing with generators at the well sources and reducing some of the storage requirements, thus our storage is adequate. So we then built a model from that GIS system. These things talk equally to each other. Now we were able to overlay the OCP for land uses and able to generate a water model from all this data that we compiled to be able to run it and then apply these growth scenarios to see what happens with the distribution system and the fire protection ability. One thing that's the rural area has a level of fire protection that we assigned to it that is kind of more of a rural area, and the standard is applicable if the homes are 30 meters apart, and it all was recently built and designed. It all works. So when you look at these figures, we kind of chop off the rural area, but it's not that we're ignoring it. It's fully compliant, or it meets all these standards. So it helps with the visuals. So in this first kind of next slides, we run the two scenarios of how is the system working right now, and then how is this system working right now if we assume we're allowed to be running our pumps, because without the generators we assume the pumps are off, but with the generators on we can now make more assumptions that the pumps are running. These red dots are all the fire hydrants in town that would be considered non-compliant to the criteria that we prepared. This shouldn't be like cause for panic. Like just because we produced criteria based on zoning or something like that, something was zoned commercial, that meant a higher fire flow, or industrial, like the industrial park by the airport, and I meant 225. And so the modeling software spits it out as a fail. But like the industrial park wasn't designed for 225. It will never have it unless we replace every pipe and the reservoir. That's not going to happen. It was designed at a different time with a lower fire flow. It will always have that lower fire flow, and it's an acceptable amount for the day. And when people build things, we do tell them what's available. We don't tell them what's going to be there. So it's not a problem. Same with Lakeshore Drive. You know, it's all red. When people do developments there, we tell them what's available. They don't get to assume that, oh, because it's on commercial, I get 150. They only get 60 because that's all that's available down Lakeshore Drive. But some of the stuff in the downtown core, could be improved. Hotel Road definitely could be improved. You can see there's red flags there. And the other one that we point out is the high school. It's challenging to make the high school better because of its location on the distribution system, but we would maybe focus on that one. It's got 135 right now. Maybe it should have 150, but we actually don't have any capital here to address that. You can see with the pumps on, 89th Street is the place to look, where you can see all of a sudden when I flip to the pumps being on, it's just things are improved because we're running water, we're improving the pressure in the neighborhoods with having wells on. And so just this decision to, have our wells available to us also improves our fire protection, just like, so not only do we not have to build reservoirs, we don't also, we can improve fire protection by just making the same decision.
When you put your generators on there with more pressure, you got more chance of bursting the pipes. Or the pipes can stand 200.
Yes, the pipe, the wells wouldn't just come on. They would only come on if they sensed the pressure was lower in the system, so. And really that's it, is when fire protection at maximum day demand, that's when everything's humming, and that's what we're modeling. The available fire flow is significantly higher on days when maximum day demand isn't there, so the wells wouldn't need to come on. If it wasn't maximum day demand, and frankly, if it was maximum day demand, they'd probably already be on. So. Fast forwarding to 2043, we do the same thing, but in this case, we're assuming that we have a water treatment plant, and the water treatment plant is set up to remove manganese, but it connects more well sources in one spot, as opposed to having the wells pumping where they're located to the system. Now we're running raw water pipes to the water treatment plant, so we don't get to benefit as much from the wells being spread out all over town. We're focusing all of the raw water to one spot. The treatment plant will generate, so it will be able to provide water into the system. And so what we did in this analysis was look at, well, what's the best spot for the treatment plant? Because there is some sites available. Well 6 was a site identified for a treatment plant up in Lacey Point area, but it wasn't the focus of all of our wells because it's so far from them. We also looked at Jack Straw Gardens. We call that the Kingfisher plant, for lack of a better name. And that was where we were going to bring well 4, 5, 8, and 1 all together. And then there's the property over near Cottonwood, Maple, that is also potentially available. So we analyzed that site as well to see if we could, tell you one is better than the other hydraulically. And so scenario 3 here is no treatment plant, and then scenario 5 and 6 are treatment plants. The differences are very nominal. But you can see if you look by the Holiday Inn with the Cottonwood plant installed, there is an improvement. Whereas with the Jack Straw or Kingfisher plant, there wasn't really any noticeable improvement. Let's come back up. I jumped ahead here. What we determined in the capital plan was that to make sure that no situation from a fire protection got worse or surface pressure got worse as a result of this growth, we had to do these 3 improvements. And like when you look at a capital plan, if I was standing here and said, this is all you have to do, we'd be high-fiving each other on the way out, because this is quite minor for a distribution upgrades for 20 years worth of growth. And it shows a lot of the stuff that we have been building through my career has been part of a bigger plan. There's been development in Maine has been advanced through this town. Well, since the 90s it started. Block by block it's been built. Some of these red lines basically connect it. It hasn't, it's not continuous through town, and this makes it continuous. And it really brings that fire protection from the reservoir sites through to the bridge and or through to the Oleander Drive neighborhood. It really makes it all work hydraulically. And these 3 projects you can see aren't significant in length or cost. So then for my previous, we have 2 treatment plant locations. We did zero in on Cottonwood as being hydraulically better. We embarked on a test well drilling program two of the wells that are identified as having water are actually located proximate to Cottonwood. So it made us even steer more towards Cottonwood as the preferred site because it's now closer to raw water. And it's hydraulically more efficient, plus Jack Shaw is a tight space, so there's actually a bit more room probably to work on the Cottonwood or Maple area. So then we had to figure out, well, how do we implement more sources and at the same time treatment, because we can't bring on a new source without treatment, and we need to bring on a new source. IHA will not let you bring on a non-compliant new source. So when we drill well 9, it has to be fully compliant with Canadian Drinking Water Guidelines. Well 9 is most likely going to be located at Maple. And it literally has to be brought on now. Well 4 and 5 are two of our largest wells. They're proximate to Maple. So what we've tried to do is develop a capital plan that recognizes you need to fund this to try and make it as soft as we can. Is that the right word? Is less of a burden, but it is really ambitious at the beginning because you need a new well, which means you need a treatment plant. You can't defer those. So you have a huge capital outlay at the very beginning. And then we're trying to be most efficient with your money to bring on other aspects as it's needed, whilst taking on, I guess, some risk. So we've tried to phase it in, and our focus on the phasing plan is dollars spent equals most megaliters per day. So, and I'll try and point this to you. What we're saying is that in phase 1 of this implementation, which literally has to happen right now, we're showing it as being constructed in 2025. That's frankly as fast as you can probably bring it online given the design. Wells 1 and 4, or no, 3 and 4, no, 1 and 3. 1 and 3 are the low manganese wells. They would sit where they are and can be used straight into the distribution system without manganese removal or treatment. Well, 4 and 5 we're currently using will need treatment. Well, 9 and 10 we're assuming can both be drilled at the Maple property and can be all plugged into one treatment plant that is basically all proximate to all those well sources are proximate to each other. So it's the lowest amount of distribution or raw water distribution piping construction to get you to a level of supply that if all the wells are working, you can meet your demand with treated water or with water that's low in manganese. If one of the wells fails, you will have to bring on well 6 or well 8, which will have manganese issues. So the idea is we try and get you step 1, no manganese in your water if everything's working. And if something isn't working, you bring on one of your other 2 wells that aren't currently connected to the treatment plant. And then phase 2 and then phase 3 will be bring those wells into the treatment plant. So we try to come up with the lowest cost first project, but you still don't meet that N-1, and then over the next few years phase in the works that will be taken to get the next wells into that treatment plant. And so that's where we're saying phase 2 is actually just a bunch of distribution upgrades that are needed to make way for well 8 plug into the treatment plant. So phase 1 is in 2025, and we're saying by 2030 you'll have to have brought on well 8 into the treatment plant. This is a drawing of how we show phase 1 working. You can see we've drilled test wells at the Maple property and the Cottonwood property. We have preliminary results that the water is available there. We're still waiting on the actual report, so we can't really finalize this to you until we get that report from the groundwater hydrologist. But you can see they're all proximate to this Maple site. We're assuming that on Maple is where the treatment plant goes. And it's the black square there. The red circles are the wells, well 4 and 5. And what's 10 would all pump through one common main to the treatment plant, would all be treated and then pumped back into the system. That in combination with well 1 and 3 would be how we meet water demand and. For the first time, we'll be supplying water reliably with no manganese, which means we can start process of cleaning it out of the system too, because it won't be putting new in. Phase 2 of the implementation plan is to build this large diameter pipe down the highway. Right now, there's a large diameter pipe in the beach in the foreshore. That one has always been planned to be converted to a raw water main, so when it gets converted to be the raw water main. We need this pipe in place, so this is a pretty ambitious project by itself because of size, so we put it a year or so in front of actually bringing well 8 online into the treatment plant. So that this could be built and then it's ready to go when we do convert the beach line to a raw water line. And that's where it's.
Can you explain, Steve, what is a raw water line, what it's used for?
Yeah, so when we build a treatment plant, wherever we build it, we have to get all the well water to it without a customer being able to take that water out of the pipe. So we have to build a separate distribution system that is simply for the source water to get to the treatment plant. Which is why it's challenging with wells that are spread out all over town to do this. And you're going to build a small treatment plant at every well, but then our operator is going to be driving around to 8 treatment plants every day, or we try and spend some of that money on pipes to make one treatment plant. The goal here with this Cottonwood location would be likely to size it so it's expandable, that even when we build wells 10, 11, 12, even if they're in Gyro Park, which they're probably not going to be in, that they would be pumped to the same plant using this large diameter pipe that is down on the foreshore as a raw water pipe. So that pipe would be converted in its use, but because we convert it, we have to replace it on Main Street with a large diameter pipe. The other key thing to point out, when if you go back to that map, I showed where you have the red pipes and the yellow pipes, but like the AC pipes that need replacing. This pipe down Main Street in front of Motel Row is a red pipe. It has to be replaced. So this is a bit. That's why we targeted it as well as a replacement as a new distribution line, because it needs to be replaced anyway. So then in the current capital plan, we've deferred connecting well 8 as long as we can based on demand, and so it has to be connected by 2030. And that's when this would have to be done. And then that way your N-1, your one pump that would still be off is well 6. And in the 20-year kind of window of this capital plan, we don't see that well 6 would have to be connected to the treatment plant. This is an overall showing all 3 phases of the capital plan as it relates to addressing source, quantity, and quality.
Where do you plan on putting the treatment plant on that Cottonwood property?
Back
I've heard different things said, and one of them was the town got that property. And it was supposed to develop some low-cost housing or something on part of it, or part of it or something.
I don't believe that was the case. I think the property was given to us to use as what we thought was best used for. Am I correct in that? I think so. There was no proviso given to us when we got the property.
That is correct. Thank you, Mayor McCora.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't know why you want my home the laser pointer, but the black rectangle off of Maple, below the red circle off of Maple, you want me to walk over and point? Can you see here? This rectangle,
Right.
that's for the purposes of this plan. That's the treatment plan. That it doesn't have to be there. That's just us showing how it works, and we're trying to produce cost estimates, right? And so that's where we located it. The Cottonwood property which is up here. There's two pieces of property there. There's right now well 10 shown on the Cottonwood property. But it would just be a well and then a pipe. That piece of property is fully available to be redeveloped as whatever council chooses. But we are showing you the footprint of what our ask would be for this treatment plant.
So are you suggesting that the best possible place for a treatment plant is the one that you've got in here on Maple? Is that your expert opinion on, is that a better place than anywhere else in town? I mean,
Of the sites that I've been asked to evaluate, yes.
Okay,
It's better than Kingfisher, and it's better than Lacy Point. And it works very well here.
thank you.
So yeah,
Steve, if I can. The two new wells that were drilled that we haven't got all the details on yet. And I'm not a well person per se at all. But at what point does proximity of one well to the other start to draw down the aquifer that they're both drawing out?
yeah. And this is why we retain groundwater hydrologist. That is their job to write us a thorough report to explain that risk to us. When we do the pump test, they add sensors in not only well 4 and 5, but well 3, which is also nearby. They're trying to see what the impact is, and then what they need to do is not only rate each well for its sustainable yield, but the well field now for the well field sustainable yield. So that will be in the report. And really, we do have to kind of say this is the plan based on our best judgment at this time and the information we received from them. And what they have told us is positive, right?
So far.
Yeah. And so when we get that report, we will finalize this document, but you know, the foreshadowing is this is what we've been told is going to be in the report.
Thank you.
Also in the capital plan are two other projects, and we've moved them way out to the year 2040, 2043. Part of the reason they're out there is that we do actually see them as partially, if not majorly developer driven. Some of this is our work that we're doing with the OIB, and that they want to be developing in the Ankeny corner and in their campground area, they want to be adding units. There is some synergy to working together. One of their projects will trigger a reservoir on the east side. We have a reservoir that's aging out. There is some synergy to be working together to help them with their project by actually softening the load on one of our other replacement projects. So we put them in the plan. We haven't fully worked out source of funds at this time as to like what percent would be allocated to water users in the capital plan and what would be assumed as paid by developers or DCCs. So that's what this piece of this water main is, and this next slide that shows an east sector reservoir. This project isn't required by our capital plan. But if the OIB triggers it, we can make it work and be beneficial to our capital plan because of our other infrastructure. And it has synergistic benefits to fire protection on this side and or emergency responses this side should we ever lose the crossing. This reservoir has some benefits that we can use, but definitely would be triggered by development the band would want to do and an agreement that we would have to strike with the band that we don't quite have yet. So when you look at the total capital plan, it's $22 million worth of projects that we're projecting in the life of the capital plan, which is the 20 years. And that shows all 3 phases of the source water, raw water. It shows those 3 distribution system upgrades that are key to keeping everything going to meet growth. And it also shows some contribution, not the full actual cost of those East Sector Reservoir, but an amount allocated to those projects that are likely to be synergistic with the OIB, so that we get a realistic total dollar value of the plan. then you start trying to figure out how to bring the two together. Because the other part here is now that, we talk asset management, that was what you already had. Now we have $22 million worth of new assets. Every time you bring one of them on, you need to start saving for its future replacement. So the trick behind asset management is, yes, we have to set a base investment level that frankly never goes down or won't go down in the life of this capital plan, which is 20 years. But then as we implement capital, that goes up. So when the water treatment plant gets added, you now need to start saving for the treatment plant replacement. I did try to do one version where we just averaged all that over the life plan and back calculated you just like one increase. But instead, the way this is presented to you is each time you add something, we calculate a new average annual investment to it. And tell you that should be added to what your asset management plan says. To show you that, yes, maybe if we could defer a reservoir project or something, we get to defer that increase to our AAI. So if we can get more life out of our older assets, it shows you, but by policy, we need to look at this every year. Like every year when we build something, there's a capital, yes, but at the end of that capital, when I produce record drawings for the public works or whatever I do, update your GIS, whatever the things you do, we also need to tell you what's the increase to the AAI so that you can make sure that you spread that out over the existing users, or if the project, like the OIB example, brings on new users, you might say, well, if they're paying the same that everyone else is paying, it might just balance the AAI. So someone needs to look at it every year and every time capital is built, what's the impact on this AI? This isn't something that we just set now and forget. It's a constant update. So we go back through the steps that I already took you through on asset management, and we add now in capital projects that are planned. The other thing that we add in here, and this is a bit of a jump, is that Public Works fed us about a week and a half ago a list of kind of what we're calling proactive projects. Like I feel like this whole report and everything I said to you today is just react. This is what we have to do. Nothing that I've said is really a choice. Proactive is what the works guys really want to see some improvement in the distribution system as well. They want to be working on projects to improve water quality, improve circulation of the water, to help them get rid of some of their trouble zones and where they're having constant water quality issues. They want to fix some of that. So we've added what we're calling proactive upgrades, and for lack of a better word, and it'll be the current draft of the report that you have doesn't have these in it, but these slides do have those projects in it because we were able to recompute the numbers once we received them. And so they're all in here, and those are ones again we can talk about. Those are the ones that might be optional, but you can see I've moved them over in the capital plan, and they're not a significant impact on the average annual investment. They do have a capital component though that needs to be financed or funded.
Can I just ask you a question regarding the contingency fee? I may have asked you this before. I'm looking here, this cost plus engineering 10% contingency, 30% of 22 million. That contingency there in case it goes offline, right? Or is that there for a different reason?
Yeah,
That's quite a bit of.
that's quite a bit. We really have troubles throwing cost estimates when we're staring at a line on a page. Like we haven't done any detailed design. We're basing these on, we're calling it class Ds. We know we need a pipe from there to there, but we haven't stared at the detail or done any drawings to do any detailed cost estimate. So what we do is we come up with average lineal meter costs for the different sizes of the pipe, say that kind of blends in bends and hydrant tees and service replacement. Like we blend a lot of the costs together and we come up with a unit price per meter, for lack of a better word, and then that's where we generate these costs off of all the pipes. So we call it class D costs. So then make sure that we're safe, we apply 30% contingency at class D.
It might not be quite as much as that.
Yeah, but in the world of today's inflation, it might be twice that. these are 2023 dollars. And, you know, I have to admit, we've been missing on 2023 cost estimates that they. You know, we thought everything had tripled in cost, well, turns out it went up 4 times. There's lots of things that are crazy on the inflation side that we assumed would start correcting now that supply chain is sorted out, but it hasn't. The prices have actually been pushed even higher this year. That we didn't expect that because the supply chain is sort of, before you couldn't buy pipe, that's why we thought pipe was $300 a meter. Now it's $350. And you can get it all day long.
Thank you.
So we took all these projects, we've come up with a whole, there's 100 and something projects here that we have to do the next 1 year. They're broken into capital projects that have to be done. And asset management projects that have to be done. And then we tried to figure out, well, what's the right order? At one time, we just had them all kind of, well, when they come up in their asset management plan, but then some years you're doing $10 million worth of work and other years you're doing none. So we tried to move them around to you know, solve source water quality, quantity kind of first. That seems the most important, public health, and start to sprinkle in some of the asset renewal because that has to happen as well. And then later on, you can see we threw in some of the more proactive ones. I know public works would love to see all the proactive ones up front, but we're trying to just come up with a plan to make this so that every year is more a similar spend, that we're not doing massive projects some years and then not others. It's just more becomes the new normal. So in the asset management projects that aren't pipes, we came up with 35 projects. And there's in the capital plan, you know, they're assigned a number. And then there's a brief little description of each one so that you can read about it. And really, public works job and our job moving forward with this capital plan will be to make decisions on these, to move them around as we see their fit. They're all put out in the 20-year plan based on our judgment and, you know, our prioritization criteria. But as other capital projects come up, if we're repaving another road, we might rejig some of these projects around to make it more efficient. But definitely of these 35 projects, they're sprinkled all over the next 20 years. And then in the water main projects, we were able to identify the high and the medium risk HC pipes and target them. So the first 12 kilometers of or 4 kilometers of high risk and then 8 kilometers of medium risk is basically being replaced in 23 separate projects for a total of $20 million. We then put a cost to all of the proactive projects, and we ended up coming up with 23 of those. And it's reducing a lot of your dead end mains, putting in some automatic flushing, putting more monitoring out in the system so the guys have a better idea in real time what the system's condition or water quality condition is like. So we have 23 projects throughout here, which will put a descriptor to each of them that's not currently in this draft in the next version for a total of 20 million. This graphically shows how or when we implemented them. You can see the red projects are capital projects. The blue ones are asset renewals. And each one has, it's hard to read, but each one has a little number on it. And so you can go to these numbers and then in the capital plan, read the brief description of what it is. But you can see we've tried to average out that total spend per year so that we are kind of keeping it consistent. The green ones are the proactive projects. So you can see on years where we might not have had as many asset management projects, we filled in the green ones to try to. And there's actually little orange projects on there as well. Those are engineering studies. So I guess what we're saying is you don't just do this and then keep going. Every 5 years, you should be reflecting on this. So we put little placeholders in here to remind us that we need to be reassessing where we're at, make sure we're doing the right thing and that we're not, above or below the curve that we need to be on. And yeah, unfortunately, project C5, which you can see in 2025, is a big spend of that, so that's a lot of treatment plant. I can't, it'll end up being spent over about 2 years, but it basically, that total is staggering. So then, as we implement capital projects, the cumulative average annual investment line is what I'm trying to show you here. So as we build, the first year of the 2024 projects, they have the value and the depreciation now that 114 extra thousand per year needs to be contributed to our AAI. So when we had it before, it was 1.4 million. Now it's 1.5 million because we built these projects. And so as we add capital, the AAI goes up. And so at the end of all this capital plan, you can see the impact to AAI is $374,000. Anytime that I report the monthly service fee, this is just us dividing that cumulative average annual investment or by 12 months divided by 3,500 user accounts. So it's a very simple, it kind of shows you like, what is this effect on the monthly fee of a water user? All that being said, we haven't been over this with Mr. Zach on how that exactly lays out, but this shows you just, order of magnitude, what the effects are on the rates. This is just a graph showing that same one previously that shows how it builds as you build these larger projects. The AAI goes up, it never goes down. This is the impact on AAI of the proactive projects, and so you can see that cumulatively they're actually not that significant. Whereas back here we were adding $9 to the average monthly water bill. The proactive projects add $2, so that they're definitely good projects. A lot of them are pipes, so they have 100-year life, so they don't have as much replacement costs, so they get spread out their AI over a longer term. So then how do we take asset management at the very beginning, now asset management of the capital, and put it all together into a new kind of reserve balance model? So that's what we've tried to do now is start blending these together. So we told you, rates are gonna go up, or AAI has to go up 300 grand over the life, but it only goes up when you build it. And same with proactive projects, it only starts going up when you build it. How do we pull this all together? We start looking at the 3 different curves that we had, which was the yellow is kind of proactive projects. They're not doing much to the AI. The capital projects are doing more. They're the blue line. And then that purple line is kind of everything added together. So it shows how our AI now has to increase more than what it was with just asset management because of all this capital that we have in the plan. So then as we try and make a recommendation to you, it's like, how are we going to do this? Like, are we going to pick our AI based on tangible capital assets, guide from the BC guide? Are we going to use some judgment to try and bring that down, knowing that we're projecting things out over 100 years? So we try to do this analysis for you to try and bring this number down if we can. So knowing that 100 years from now is unknown, and we don't want to necessarily be over saving, especially because we're starting in a hole. If we were starting with a bigger surplus, maybe we could make judgment to cross this easier, but we do need to try and use some judgment to try and make sure that we're not asking today's users to fund too much of tomorrow's users problem, and to the point where these contributions could go down. So we looked at three scenarios. One would be the textbook answer, the easy one that tells us you follow the guide, you take the exact life, you divide it, and that's all. Then we looked at, well, what would it be, how much would we have to contribute to have no reserves when those PVC pipes are come due in today's dollars? So that was just like, basically the reserve goes to zero in 100 years, and there's no planning kind of for like what's behind that. And the third scenario was, well, how low could you go to just never go below zero in the next short term, like just keep the rate or the reserve balance in a positive territory while we get through this AC replacement. And again, get a 100-year graph on here, and I've drawn the square around it. I don't want to dwell on it, but you can see the scenario 3 line that falls right off the bottom of the thing. That's effectively what history has done to us. Like, we're literally sitting off the edge of one of these cliffs. Like, we don't have reserves funded, and so we're sitting down there in the bottom in a negative situation. And we're at -10. That one's just -25. But what we need to do is try and set this rate to follow one of these graphs, ideally above that scenario 3, and what we've said is potentially scenario 2, which stays above the zero line at least when this PVC comes to replacement. Whereas scenario 1 with just the tangible capital assets calculation, you can see when the PVC pipe is repaired, there's still 20 million in the reserve account. So it's like, it's not wrong. It's, if we replace every asset at exactly the end of its life, that amount of money will need to be there. But we want to try and focus now on a 20-year, like what are we going to do in the 20-year window, but recognizing our decision could cause a future -25. So we want to try and find that balance. So zooming on the same graph, but now just looking at the next 20 years. We're trying to decide, like, what is our reserve balance going to look like at the end of this capital plan with what level of investment we make. And so instead of investing the 1.45 million per year, can we tweak that down, and how much can we tweak it down before we start crossing zero or having a lower balance at the end. And really all these options that we present here, scenario 1, 2, and 3, keep you above zero. Scenario 2, I think, sets the future up for a better future in that it has $7 million in the reserves at the end. Whereas scenario 3 only has basically $2.5–3 million in reserves with what we have now. So it's kind of like we start with what we have. 20 years, we do all this capital and all this asset renewal, and we're back where we started. So when we look at this, is just funding asset management, right? So this has nothing to do with actually implementing capital. So this is just funding asset management, those 3 scenarios that I showed. And really, I think scenario 1, it's the most expensive, and it's likely not the most responsible. We shouldn't be cranking up it so that we have all this extra $1 million at the end. Our recommendation is to look more at that in-between amount, which was scenario 2, which still had that $7 million in reserves at the end of the 20-year capital plan, as opposed to scenario 3, which basically has the exact same amount of reserves in 20 years as there is now. And the key thing to look at here is the difference when you do it as a monthly fee. So you divide this total by 3,500 connections, it's $6. So it's a depth between scenario 2 and scenario 3. If we asked everyone to pay $6 more, I think we're doing the right thing. Like we're going to have $7 million at the end of this, as opposed to trying to save $6 and end up potentially falling off that cliff in 80 years from now, right? So it's trying to set future councils up for success in future asset management planning for when all these other assets need to be renewed. So then, we have to figure out, well, how to do the other projects, and. For this analysis and this presentation, we assumed you borrowed 100% of the money for all of the projects, so this is worst case. But this is how do you implement the capital now, because capital. Asset has to be implemented, so does capital, we don't have enough water, so we have to implement capital. And so we assumed a 4.6% interest rate, and then the capital was 100% borrowed. For each of the projects as it shows up in that schedule, just to give you an exercise on how it affects rates. You can see in the first few years, we end up $16 million in debt. And 4% doesn't help you climb out of that hole. 7% would be worse, but we end up looking at, well, what is the monthly service charge increase to cut to carry all this capital off? And that's presented here. So we have, what we have here is the first line, scenario 2, that is asset management. That was what we needed to increase rates to cover asset management. The next line says capital finance. That's the capital program that basically has to be done. And if we finance it 100% at 4.6, that is the impact on rates as it gets implemented. You can see at the very bottom, in 2043, the asset management side, we're looking at a $40 per month rate increase for asset management. But beside it is a $30 per month increase for capital. And beside that is another $11 per month increase for the proactive projects. So you can see that the asset management basically is a doubling of your rates. Capital is another, well, the same amount up, right? It's not another double, it's not redoubling, but basically, we're faced with a factor of 3 multiplier here that we're up against, and that's why we've been trying to spend so much time trying to soften this, but it's hard to soften this any more than this. This is softened. And so really the total on the far side is an 83. And that we can't fix the 40, like that is the reality, and that's going to happen. That's how we replace our pipes. What we can do is try and find sources of funding for the other 40. We need DCC bylaw updates, we need grant funding applications for any project and every project we can to try and soften that. That's the one that we can try and soften. But the way this is presented, if we don't soften them by finding other sources of funding, we're looking at another doubling. That brings me to the end. And I almost want to rewind back to that graph that showed you all the red AC pipes. Because what it has to remind you, they passed the end of their life. They did, it's gone. 2010 was the end of their life. We're now in 2023. And so we need to start dealing with them. And instead of doing what previous communities have just saved money and or thought they were saving money, it turns out you're never saving enough because construction inflation has just been through the roof. We need to actually start implementing now. We don't have a choice. And so what we've tried to do here is tell you this is the best order. These are the most important pipes that are past the end of their life. Start fixing them. And that's it basically their renewal becomes your capital plan. We're calling it asset management, but it's literally your capital plan. They all have to be replaced. So we need to start with those most critical ones and get going. But in the same breath, I realized sitting and telling you we don't have compliant water with Canadian drinking water standards, nor do we have enough. So we have a capital program that needs to be implemented, and we have an asset program that has to be implemented. We need to figure out a way of doing them both. So to reiterate kind of what I said is ideally we can find some funding for some of this capital to try and soften this on the residents. But in reality, they all have to be done, so we're looking at. These increases are the normal, like this is gonna happen, and we can't defer this one year.
That's the end of your good news for today. Thank you very much. Like it really is quite interesting and it's a bit scary, but I think you put it in sort of perspective, so we know what we're expected to do, and certainly in the next 20 years. And wow, thank you very much. So is there anybody that wanted to add anything else or ask questions or? Absorb it. Yeah, go ahead.
I make one comment, I think, and a good overview of the situation of our, our water utility and in a few more weeks, bringing our sewer wastewater type stuff, and we'll see where that's at. What administration is planning on doing is hopefully bringing forward some budget requests as far as, what guideline, what do you want us to incorporate into 2024? And so we're hoping to bring kind of a preliminary checklist at the council in August. And this is obviously going to be one. And how fast we want to move on this is kind of what is indicated. The water is 30 years kind of late, but we're likely administration to come forward in August saying, what do you want to incorporate into the budget for 2024? So we start doing budget deliberations. We already kind of have an idea of where you want to go. Obviously, you can still change your mind, but yeah, we're just going to come forward in August. I just want to prepare you for that, so we can prepare a budget that's in alignment with what your expectations are. And obviously, your utilities is going to be, by the look of this, is probably the ballpark 2.5 times. I just want to make this a public statement. People are expecting or understanding the situation that we're actually in. 2 to 3 times what the rate is today. If we get some grants, maybe it's less than 3, but really grants, we're at 3 times what we're paying on the water right now, which is just under $500. That's not even a maximum situation. It still has a significant amount of risk embedded in it. Yeah, so I just want to give you the next steps as far as where we're going and trying to reiterate to the public where we're at, and likely where we're gonna have to go with water rates so that they can start preparing financially for some of these things. And this is just water, sewers next, and all of our other assets, we're going to be going through the same thing. And I think the story is the same on all of our assets. We've got the roads, we've got the sidewalks, we've got the parks, we've got the recreation facilities, we have tons of infrastructure, and doing these asset management plans need to be embedded in our overall budgeting process. So this is our first one. Fleet was done a little bit before, but we didn't incorporate that into our budget process. So there's lots more to come. Yeah, just trying to prepare our ratepayers to see what is coming down the pipe. Thank you.
I think we've been ahead. Jared?
So the other thing I just want to add to Mr. Isling is the fact that these numbers do not include the operational side of the equation either. So as we bring different assets online, there is an operational cost with these assets online. So for instance, the water treatment plant, there are going to be operational increases that come along with that aren't included in these costs. So that will again affect user rates as we move these projects forward.
Agreed, I think we understand that, yeah, for sure. Okay. Round 1. Thank you very much. What? Okay. Ready to go on to the next? Ms. McKay, and sure. Yeah. Thanks, Dan. Nope. just wait a sec. We haven't postponed the meeting, but we do have a couple people missing, so can we just wait a sec?
Sure, absolutely, respecting your referral.
We play my place.
I don't know.
Great, thanks so much. Okay, good morning, Mayor and council members. So I'm here today to just do a little bit of sort of a little bit of a presentation report, just to inform council on a little bit more, just provide a little bit more information on some topics we've talked about previously while we're updating our foreshore lake zoning bylaw. We've talked pretty briefly about things like foreshore leases and head leases and what's the difference of A and B and all that kind of good stuff. So that's what we're here to talk about and give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have. So I'm just going to launch right into the presentation, but you'll see a lot of the information. It's also covered off in the report as well. Yeah, I'm pushing towards Lauren. Okay. So again, I'm going to go a little bit over some information about BC assessment and the role that they play in foreshore leases. Defining also again those leases, general permissions, commercial leases. And again, information about tenure around the foreshore area of Osoyoos, and also just going to give you a little bit more information around where our foreshore bylaw applies to, because there seems to be a lot of questions about that. So again, I think it's important to recognize that BC assessment considers pardon me, crown land is in fact land. So whether it's underwater or not underwater, it's still considered to be land. And I think that that's an important thing to remember as we go through this and we talk about the updates to the foreshore lake zoning bylaw. So basically, a tenure of any sort is an agreement, of course, between the individual or company or upland property owner in some cases with the government in order to use that portion of the land. And of course, as we talk about the foreshore, that means land that is in fact covered with water. So again, whether the property is leased or not, if it's occupied by someone, it is considered taxable. So that's an important part to remember as we move forward. Okay, so again, when BC assessment completes their assessment, they actually consider such things as what is that area being used for in the foreshore in our particular example here, or any restrictions that the Crown might have placed on that land. Thanks so much. So again, in BC, the province owns again all the foreshore areas of the freshwater, saltwater, foreshore, and rivers in most cases. And again, land adjacent to the foreshore could be privately owned, but in common law, the public retains the privilege or access to those areas. So again, the definitions, the foreshore is the land between the high and low water marks, and the aquatic crown, which is, that is the land in front, like the water covered area of the land, including the foreshore from the municipal high water mark. And it's important to recognize that this means that this marks out to the limits of our municipal jurisdiction. Need water already. So in this particular slide, it's demonstrating that the town boundaries actually extend out to that green line. Most people don't recognize this, and I think it's an important thing to discuss right now, because I often hear people say, oh, well, we can do what we want up there. I mean, that's not your land, that's the province's land. But actually, those are municipal jurisdiction. So we do have the ability to restrict or encourage different uses in that area. Thanks, Lauren. Again, land use for private moorage. So let's just say that you have property that abuts the foreshore. You have an opportunity to use that. So non-commercial activities in that area that would be permitted would be things like a dock, a boat way, a ramp. But it does not apply to mooring buoys used for private moorage. So the construction, placement, or use of any of that area of ground land has to be authorized by the Ministry of Forest Lands and Natural Resources. Now I'm going to speak a little bit more about that, because if you just read that carte blanche, you'll think that that means that I can't put a dock out in front of my foreshore area if I own water on the lake, but in fact can, as long as it complies with the general permissions. Now, the general permissions speak to the width of the dock, the width of a ramp, the space between the dock itself and the edge of your property, if it were extended into the foreshore. Our foreshore lake zoning bylaw has been written such that it complies with the general permissions of the Crown. Which means to say that if you have land in the foreshore, your uses in that area, if you follow our bylaw, are compatible and allowed by the Crown without obtaining a lease from the Crown. I guess I should probably just mention one thing as we go past that slide, that moorage facilities of greater than 3 berths are required to have provincial approval, and that would be such a thing as a strata moorage or a commercial moorage. So get a little bit more information about general permissions. So that can be granted over ocean, lake, river, whatever docks in the foreshore, and you don't have to apply to the Crown for those applications. A lot of permissions, when they do grant them, say for something that's fixed in the water, they have an expiry date. So let's say, for example, you wanted to put a fixed strata moorage facility in front of your strata condominium development, for example, you would need permission from the Crown, and that's as an expiry date. A good example of that might be what we will eventually see at the end of Cottonwood on that particular property at 8,000 Cottonwood. We will see a fixed dock and moorage facility put in for that strata development, and it will have a fixed term. So again, as long as you construct in compliance with our foreshore lake zoning bylaw, that falls into general permissions, and they're considered to be deemed authorized by the Crown. Again, if it doesn't meet the conditions and requirements stated in the general permission, you need to apply to the province. And of course, the way we help manage the provincial regulations is through our foreshore development permit. So anybody that puts in a dock facility in the foreshore area is supposed to apply to the town for a development permit. It's a nominal fee of $250, and it just ensures that you're complying with the general permissions of the Crown.
Is the length of the dock, I mean, is it 10 years or 20 years or?
Oh, for the crowd, for general permissions, thank you, through the chair. So for general permissions, there's no expiry date. The only expiry date is for if you need a special permission for a facility like a multi-birth facility. Or a commercial facility,
And who makes a judgment how long? it can
the
stay?
crown,
So does that apply to 800 Cottonwood?
yes,
Yeah.
that's correct.
So that they know that when they purchase there, that there might be a limit to.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely. That's all, it's clearly spelled out, thank you, Mayor Corral. It's clearly spelled out on the Crown's website and also through the application process. Which, you know, these people would employ the services of someone that familiar working in that area.
and other than that, they apply to you, am I correct? Even if they need something from the provincial government, the way to do that is to go through the planning department.
So if they need a general permission, they don't need approval from the province. As long as they comply with general permission. They are required to apply to the municipality for a development permit. It's a very simple process. It's handled directly in the department. So it's not something that has to be approved through council. Because our job is just to make sure that those requests are complying with the provincial guidelines.
Thanks.
So again, specific permissions are basically that's for docks that don't meet the general permission criteria, which we just discussed in general. Those include things like standalone boat lifts and permanent boatways or permanent ramps. So specific permissions are again available to the Crown through the Crown for waterfront property. But only one private mortgage facility is allowed per property. Now, what that means is if let's just use the same example so that we're not specifically looking at properties that already have a private mortgage facility. In other words, other stratas on the lake. If we look at the property 8,000 Cottonwood, they would have to have one docking facility. They are not permitted to have more than one per waterfront parcel. Okay. So again, you can apply for these special facilities for residential and recreational users. Now, this lease is basically issued when you're intending to make a substantial investment. So let's just say you're gonna run a waterfront recreation property type permanent infrastructure of some sort with slides or whatever. It's a commercial property. You need to apply to the Crown when you're gonna make that kind of substantial investment in the area. The term is usually for 20 years unless there's some special agreement with the Crown, and there's a fee. And then there's also lease fees that apply. And those lease fees are based on what the Crown thinks you're going to make off of that commercial venture. So it's pretty straightforward. Again, moving over to the next slide, you can see here. Where any area of the aquatic land again requires a lease, an additional annual charge of $1 per square meter is levied. Now that is only up to a maximum of $400, but that does not include charges for something like, let's use the Wivet as an example. Because they have to pay fees that are a portion of what they make off that foreshore area.
They pay that to us, to the
And
town
then
or to the.
it goes to the Crown.
Okay.
So we did talk briefly about what a head lease is, and I remember specifically, we were looking at the idea of possibly a head lease, for example, in the area of the Jasmine Drive. And that is because we have a foreshore lease over that area. And that foreshore lease does not allow us to give anybody a permit to put their dock in that area. So if we were going to look at a way of authorizing the docks in the foreshore, that area or any area around the town, we would have to apply to the Crown for a head lease. Only with a head lease, which can be very complex agreement, they would obligate us to take on some financial and professional legal burdens. But then again, if we were going to take on the head lease in any here or anywhere else in the community, we would look to recover that money. Again, let's turn back to the, we have a head lease there.
How about Acacia Court down there?
We could apply for a head lease there because we're the upland property owner.
Because we got a letter from them recently.
That's correct.
So I'm just, can you explain what the different, and you don't have to do it right now, but.
No,
the-
I'd actually be
the
happy to do it now. Thank you, Mayor McCormick, because there are a couple of items for discussion that I noted in the report. It is an area that we will eventually have to make an decision on. It does not have to be done today, of course, but in order that we all have the information we need to make an informed decision. What we would have to do there, we'd have to look at, in conjunction with working with the Crown, what is the land, what is the value of the foreshore there? And what would be able to be recuperated. So their use in that particular area is recreation, which is very different than the use of the Whibbit, which is for commercial purposes. So obviously the Crown takes all this into consideration. Somebody's gonna use it for recreation, it has a different value than it would for the commercial uses. So we would work out an arrangement with the Crown to take out a head lease over that area or other areas we might consider this in. And I would also suggest that that might have to be the case if we're going to go into a buoy lease program. But in the case of the Jasmine Drive Acacia Court area, we would work with the Crown to come up with a head lease that had that captured the uses that are going to be considered there by the upland property owners.
So just in there, in the letter that we got recently from the, I'm not
Right.
from there. They said that they had been promised something 10 years ago and they didn't take that. And I don't quite understand what that was, but they are concerned about what they thought they were gonna get and what they might
Sure.
get, and they were a little worried about having to look at this foreshore.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I can launch in and explain that a little bit.
But
If that's helpful.
I'm thinking it might be helpful for them, and I'm wondering, is that something that you might do with the landowners there and explain what they can do, or I wasn't sure.
Well, right now, our foreshore lake zoning bylaw does state that that particular area. You can apply to the town for a permit to put a dock in. There is no such permit process that we can entertain in that area under our current foreshore lease. So we would have to take out a different type of lease. For that area if we wanted to be able to grant permits. Much the same way, again, circling back to the Whibbit, although it's commercial use. We have a head lease over that area, which is why we are able to have a lease agreement with the Whibbit operation.
Sure.
So in this particular area, we could entertain a head lease with the Crown, and then we could sublet space to those upland property owners.
Do we know whether that particular way of doing it will be acceptable to them, or have they been provided that information?
I have not discussed that with them
Okay,
directly at this time. But it's certainly something that we intend to do, if that's the direction that council wishes to go.
Yeah.
But I
I
will
just think we need to somehow deal with it and explain what it is they need to do, or
right, so
and how to fix that.
as much as it's a difficult subject. We should probably think about the fact that that's not the only area of town that has. Uses happening in the foreshore area.
Yeah.
That are not, that is the property that is the town's. We have control over the foreshore areas.
No, I agree about that for sure.
So it's gonna be complex, certainly. So again, these agreements can obligate an applicant to pay again, financial fees, etc. And all the agreements as stated here in this presentation, they're all unique. So the condition, obligations, etc. would be unique to where that particular head lease is. And Often they're used in areas where it's, we want to take some control over the portion. Basically, the standard is usually about 30 years. As noted here, but it could go up to a maximum of 60, it could also be less if that was a direction that council wanted to go, since you would be responsible for taking out the head lease. Okay, so let's move on to the pricing again. So it's basically about 50% of the total revenue of the head lease. So again, that is where the WIBIT comes into play. Formula was devised and they pay that to the Crown again, based on what the Crown thinks their total revenue will be there. They have to be very specific. What the actions or functions are to be provided in that particular area. In other words, we couldn't take out a head lease and say we're gonna let some commercial operations happen in that head lease area over at Lions Park or whatever. We would have to be very specific about what those uses are. Say, for example, we wanted to allow people to set up a paddleboard rental or something. We would want to have a commercial head lease because it's a commercial operation. We want to make sure that they're paying their fair share and we are as well. So moving along, basic application fees, simply head leases. If you just want to make an application and start talking to them, you're looking at $50 an hour plus GST staff time just to start talking about a head lease. So they don't do it for free. General commercial application fees are only $262. So that's just some general information on the different types of foreshore uses, be it commercial or not. And again, if we just looked at the discussion section of the report, I think we just should remember that we have discussed this before. There is a proliferation of buoys in the lake and the foreshore areas. Again, over which we have a lease with the province of British Columbia. That lease specifically states that we are not allowed to allow anyone to put anything in the foreshore. That includes buoys, boat lifts, boat ramps that you see if you drive down areas where there's lots of recreational vehicle parks. Again, also the area of Jasmine Drive, which we've already talked about. Couple other things that are interesting also is areas within the town where a private property extends out into the water. There's a couple areas like this. Peanut Pond, if anybody recalls, I think how we want to phrase it. It does have some properties there where their property actually extends into the foreshore. And then there's some unique properties as well. Like I did provide a map for you there. I'm not sure how many people were aware of this, but the property between Harbor Key or the land, well, water, it's covered in water, but the land covered in water. The foreshore area between Harbor Key Drive and Solana Key Court. We're actually named as a property owner of that water parcel.
The yellow,
That's correct.
okay.
So it's just something interesting to note that, there's no cases that are the same.
So what's the next step? You make it.
Thank you, Counselor. The next step would be, again, this is just providing some information as we move forward into more discussion about what changes we're looking at. We might want to consider, or council might want to consider for the foreshore lake zoning bylaw, just so that when we get to that point, we're having this conversation, you're equipped with a little bit more information.
Yeah, because to me, it's pretty confusing still. I'm not sure how you figured this out, but I'm glad you know.
Anybody else?
Anybody have any other? Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I guess it is more complex when I look at the one that I'm, I totally don't get this and that, because we're doing like 7 years of government and so it's not quite as cut as this. There's a lot more to it.
Well, thank you, Counselor. Bennett, through the chair, it is not that simple. It is complex. And if you wish, I could speak to the particular situation at Island View, Island View's foreshore area is very shallow. They have looked, as you well know, at opportunities for a group storage facility, which is like a docking facility of some sort. The challenge there is it is very shallow. It would probably have to be dredged on a regular basis to allow access to it. The buoys that are out there now are not technically permitted in the foreshore. So it is a challenge. Yeah. And that, it's not the only property like that.
But if it's a head, my computer is more, like when we talk, is that is what you consider a head lease. And then they have to, every like 4 years, they have to do another application,
So
or 7 years or something.
that would not be a head lease.
Oh, okay.
That would not be a head lease because it would not be for commercial purposes. So your lease with the Crown would be similar to one like Solivita, for example.
Okay.
So that's, yeah, thank you. That's a really good question. I appreciate you bringing it up. That particular case is similar to other areas where there's a lease agreement with the Crown for the strata use of the foreshore. And it would have to comply with the requirements of the Crown, which would be a strata moorage facility, which means a dock. And
Thank you.
berths.
No, I was it was totally different than this, right? So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So do you spend a lot of time dealing with individual, like property owners or group or people that have, say, like Island View? And if they're all a little bit different, how do we get to understand what their particular issues, how to deal with?
Oh, thank you, Mayor McCrae. Most of the time we deal with private property owners that have property in the foreshore that just ask what can they do there,
Okay.
right? So that's generally easy because it is, our foreshore and lake zoning bylaw complies or is aligned with provincial guidelines. So as long as you're complying with those guidelines. We do get inquiries, obviously, about group moorage facilities. But because we have limited properties on the lake, there's a limited number of inquiries, but we are working with a couple of areas right now and with the Crown.
So before I was on council, I was a member of the foreshore and lake zoning group that was looking at all this. It was confusing back then. Partly why I was interested in being on that was because we have our town, we have area A, we have the OIVs, and we've got the across the line. So we sort of have 4 different, I'm assuming, jurisdictions on this lake, and it does make it. It makes it a little, I know they're slightly different, and so it makes it confusing.
Thank you, Mayor McCrae. I just would like to point out that the regional district is considering a foreshore and lake zoning bylaw for the north end of the Suze Lake.
Good.
And what about the south end houses along the lake? You have to apply the RDOI?
They don't have to apply to the RDOS right now. Thank you, Councillor King, through the chair. They would have to comply with the general permission, and they're supposed to get a permission from the Crown.
Okay, anything else?
I didn't mean to muddy the waters.
Well,
It will be brought up again.
yeah, well,
Thank
we
you.
know that it's confusing for
Yeah.
sure, yeah. I'm just wondering how we handle the letter that was written by the property owners on occasion. And is that, because I think we all got sort of sent copies of it, and is that possible to answer them or? I'm
Thank
not
you,
sure.
Mayor McCrae. I have spoken to that particular gentleman on more than one occasion, and many, if not all,
Yes.
of the property owners in that area, and they recognize that we're going through this process, and they most have all been informed. Also because of many of the properties have changed hands,
Sure,
that we are looking at some options to resolve the issue.
good, thank you. That's what I wanted to know. Anything else? Okay, so I'm assuming we can terminate. Who had their hand up first?
I will pass it.
Okay, Councillor King, Councillor Poderica, second.